Welcome to Assumptions, the podcast where two friends, one an atheist, that's me, Kyle, and one a Christian, that's Daniel, sit down and listen to each other's worldview. This week, Daniel is not here, which I know what many of you are thinking. Finally. He was raptured. None of that is true.
Kyle, enough about me and my friends. Here I am, bringing all my favorite writers on my topics, come back my points up, leaving you in the dust.
That's right.
When are you going to invite your gay authors to come on our show and talk about sexuality?
Oscar Wilde has been dead for 200 years, so that's going to be a hard thing to do, unfortunately. But no, I had this chance when I went down to PodCon here this past December to talk to two friends who have become very, very good friends over the past couple of years.
Very different too, right?
And very different backgrounds, but definitely forming those deep bonds, which some people talk about, people starting their relationships on the internet and then growing in them into real life. And that was definitely how both of these friendships have kind of blossomed. Let's start off with Nick Taniguchi.
Yeah.
Nick Taniguchi is randomly some person that I met in a hotel lobby, and that is not even a joke. In the third year of VidCon, so we're talking 2012, I was going down out of my hotel room, and there was a person I had met there before at VidCon in the lobby, and I decided to go over and say hi.
Wow.
And then these two guys were sitting next to them, and that was Nick and Chris Taniguchi.
Right.
They're twin brothers.
Yeah. Chris is known for our audience for doing the artwork for our
Correct.
show, the logo.
You would know Chris because of the artwork that you see each and every 2 weeks when we're doing this podcast. And so we struck up a friendship, and of course that kind of remained online for much of it. But they were doing music videos primarily. They were musicians together on their channel called Playgrounders. And since that time, Nick and I have jumped onto Skype every so often. We've kept up communications with each other. And I feel that we have kind of this deep friendship bond that has grown over time. To meet Nick is to meet absolute enthusiasm. It is like the embodiment of joy when you meet Nick Taniguchi. He is beyond, he's a person who's always supportive. He always wants to know what's going on, and I just appreciate his nature and his candor. He currently is hosting his own podcast called Crush Hour, which is all about crushes, like your first crush that you had, or talking about how a first date went. He talked to his mom about dating and her teen life and early adulthood. So it's a really great podcast that I definitely recommend people go and check out.
Yeah, somewhat similar to our theme.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. How did the conversation go with him?
It went really, really great. I mean, we did this in his house on the last day that I was there for PodCon. It was basically, we filmed a video, I did the interview, and then I left for Missoula, Montana, which was a 6-hour drive. That was my day that day.
Well, thanks for fitting him in. Now, the other guest that we're going to be hearing from today is kind of different.
Yeah.
Why is that?
His name is Tyler May, and I also met him at VidCon a few years after I had met Nick and Chris for the first time at this. Really, the one time I remember seeing him at something called The Secret Show that happens every year at VidCon, which is a bunch of musicians get together and actually perform a show just on the outskirts of VidCon. It's not sanctioned by the conference or anything. They just do it every year so that they can have kind of this neat little concert that happens around there. And so we struck up a bit of a friendship there. I was seeing some of his videos that he was doing online. And he actually had a Skype call with me here a few months ago, just somewhat come out as being someone who was
He came out. He came out to you?
Well, wait for the finishing of this sentence. Came out to me as having bipolar, being bipolar. So have very, very manic, and then very, very low depression, to the point where he had almost committed suicide.
Wow.
Right. And so this is a really, really intense conversation we were having, and I think from there, really, our friendship actually deepened a whole lot because we shared this moment with one another.
Yeah.
I was able to talk about my own struggle with suicide when I was younger. And he opened up also that he was very faithful. Like he regarded himself as a Christian, and he said, "I need to tell you this because I mean you're bisexual, and that is kind of incompatible in many ways with my upbringing." But we had open conversations. Well, we had open conversations about that, and so he's been a big supporter of me. I just think he's an interesting dude in his own right. He's a brilliant photographer. He is the co-host of a podcast called Mr. Feels, which is all about mental health. Yeah. And so I was actually a guest on the second episode of that podcast. But also there's been other ones since then talking things about like anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder. Depression has been on there too. But I think it's a really great podcast that shows that we don't have to hide away from mental health, that it's important to give our stories and talk about it and seek help when we need to.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing those rather contrasting views on this double.
Well, I mean, Tyler himself, what's interesting is that someone like you has very deep-seated beliefs, but also recognizes that the church can sometimes do better in certain areas. Yeah. It's not just like whatever they say I have to do 100%. Yeah. So there's kind of a reckoning with that too. And
I haven't heard either of these interviews yet. I will.
We say some real mean things about Daniel.
Yeah, so I'm excited for that.
That's right.
Well, enjoy those interviews, and thanks for both of those friends of the show for being interviewed.
Yeah. Once all of the interview episodes have been posted, Daniel and I will return in an episode where we're going to be listening to some of your feedback, listening to some of the voice messages you may have left, the emails that you have sent in, the Twitter messages that you have tweeted at us, to wrap up all of our thoughts on this season. But not to belabor the point, let's get into these conversations that I had with Nick and Tyler. I fall down to my knees.
I don't do this for a living. Hi, I'm Nick Taniguchi. I make a podcast called Crush Hour. It's a podcast about crushes, feelings, and all that emotional goop. Smile. Ooh. Right? I'm good at this. I'm practiced, right?
You're like a professional musician.
Dutch babies are driving me wild. It's feeling cold, but you bring me a smile. I don't do this for a living. Anyway.
All right, Nick, we're going to jump right into it. Dan and I both came up with some of these questions, or elaborated on them. So I'm going to ask you here first, for a Christian audience, the concept of being polyamorous is a kind of a foreign concept. So could you explain exactly what that is and why you consider it your lifestyle?
That's a tricky question because I think being polyamorous, the big misconception that I want to address is that being polyamorous, at least in the current culture of it, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I can only speak for myself, but what it means to me is that I feel like I have the capacity to love a lot of people, and my ideal relationship involves not necessarily being with a lot of people, but at the very least acknowledging that I can have these feelings for a lot of people.
How did you get to that realization?
I tend to be, in my relationships, I tend to be very monogamous, but I've always wanted to talk to my partners about other people that I'm attracted to, and I wanted to hear about who they were attracted to. And in my very monogamous relationships, that came across as really weird to my partners. So that was confusing. One day, I kind of had a crush on this girl, and I knocked on her door. I was dropping her off at home, and then I kind of took a leap and I went down the stairs, and then I ran back up the stairs again because I was like, screw it, I'm gonna do the thing. I knocked on her door and I was like, hey, I really like you, do you want to go on a date? And then she was like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm kind of seeing someone. And I was like, and then she was like, but we're in an open relationship, I'm poly, so I can ask him about it. It was like, yay. And so I started seeing this girl over the summer, and she kind of showed me the ropes and taught me about this community and about polyamory and some of the terminology associated with it. That was kind of my introduction to it, and I just kind of started learning more and more over time about it, and that was my introduction.
What do you think the purpose of sex is?
It can be anything from feeling really good to kind of strengthening that feeling of intimacy with someone you really care about.
Do you think there's any considerations one needs to have before doing it?
Safe sex, know what you're getting into, understand the principles of consent. Oh my god, consent is so important. And teaching yourself the nuances of it, it can be a really good thing. I highly recommend watching shows like Sexplanations with Lindsay Doe, and shows like that. It's really good. It feels really good, and sex feels really good. It feels nice to like know what I'm getting into, and I highly recommend that for anyone. It feels so much safer and more comfortable knowing the ins and outs of sex than being in the dark. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Is marriage important to you?
Not currently. I don't think I'm responsible enough. I don't think I'm in a place in my life where I'm ready to be married, because I'm like a homunculus. I'm like 75% of a human at this point.
Is that something that you want to do, you think, someday?
Maybe. But I think especially because like if I was to get married, I would want to get married to someone that I really love and care about. Why would I inflict upon this person a 75% version of myself? It seems kind of cruel, especially because I understand that with other people you kind of grow, but there are lots of pieces of you that kind of get locked into place that I've seen, like when other people get into relationships or marriage, like certain things lock into place. I want to make sure the things that lock into place are like decent and good.
We're going to move into kind of like family relationships here now. Mm-hmm. I know you've lived in a bunch of different places in the world. Is there any single place that you consider to be home?
I think living nomadically, home becomes about the people that you're with. And this is going to sound cheesy, but like I love going to VidCon and I love going to these conventions and seeing you guys, because when people come together that I care about, that's when I feel like I'm home, and I just want more of that. I want that all the time.
How important is your family to your life?
Very important. I see them, ironically, I see my family not very often, because I live in a very nomadic family. We jump around and we live our lives in the places that we feel that we should, and it's kind of always been that way. But because of that, we try not to leave disorder and like anger and bouts between us as we leave. So we're very supportive and loving of each other, especially. So then when we get back together, when we're all together in one place, we can all be together and happy. And it's, yeah.
Do you have any type of like moral or belief system that governs your life?
I consider myself philosophically like an absurdist, which is to say, like, it's kind of like nihilism, except more optimistic. Like, life is devoid of meaning, but ice cream tastes nice. Let's all be good to each other.
I want that on a t-shirt. What has your interaction with Christians been like?
Really good. I have a lot of Christian friends. I know there are like some people who hold ideologies in Christianity and like use that in order to take that out on other people, which I've seen sometimes. But like all the Christians I've known, I think I've been very privileged to know all my Christian friends are really nice, very open-minded, work really hard to incorporate and understand other viewpoints, which is, I think, an aspect of said religion that I really admire. Really, really nice. Most of my friends, because I lived in this very Christian-y part and Mormon-y part of Irvine. This pie tastes really Mormon-y.
Let's talk about dating for a second. And this is a very leading question, I admit. But is dating the absolute worst, or is it a bit better than advertised?
How is it advertised? No, I guess it is advertised. Dating's a real good time. Wait. Asterisk. Dating is a good time when it's a good time. I've heard so many stories. I host a podcast that like basically I just ask people about their crushes and dating life, and it really can run the spectrum. It's like the question of like, how is dating? Is dating good or bad? Is as like versatile as asking like, what do you think of humanity? Good or bad? Oh, how about this? It tends to be really good for men, and it tends to be pretty bad for women, from what I've heard. So I'm real sorry about that. Sorry about all the bad dates.
What's your primary way to date people?
I use dating apps a lot. And then if I like the person, I'll hang out with them a lot in real life.
Not necessarily romantic relationships, but which friendships do you consider the most important to you right now?
The people I date. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
You did that this weekend again.
There are a handful of people in my life that absolutely warm my heart. You two. I say you two because Tyler's here.
I thought you meant the band.
You two is my best friend.
Love Bono. Great
Yeah,
guy.
there are a handful of people in Irvine who I love really dearly. There are a handful of people I love from YouTube. There are a handful of people in Washington, and I think those people compose all my favorite friends and people.
For you, are friendships hard or easy to maintain?
Very easy. I have ADHD, and one of the aspects of that is like, even if people are out of sight, it's I kind of forget that they're out of sight. So I guess that's also just object impermanence. It's not that I forget my friends are there, it's that I forget that my friends aren't here. So like they really stick with me in my brain and my heart, even when they're away for long periods of time.
Where do you find community?
I find community through YouTube, or I found community through YouTube. Who knows where I'll find it next, but I just so happen to be in this really nice pocket of good, talented, sweet YouTube people who weave in and out of my life and just form an amazing community.
These last few questions are going to be kind of similar, but there is kind of a marked difference to them. The first is, do you ever suffer from loneliness?
Hell yeah.
And how do you respond to it?
Loneliness is pretty rare for me, just based off the way my brain is wired, like I talked about earlier. So I think when I feel it, I really try to experience it and take it in. There is a concept in Japanese philosophy called wabi-sabi, and nowadays it means Japanese beauty, which I think is kind of a silly interpretation of it. But the older interpretation of it was finding solace in like solitude, finding beauty in that slight pang of loneliness and being out in nature. And so I think very highly of that feeling, and I try to experience it in its fullness and try to discover, like, when I feel that, I feel like it's really easy for me to understand what it means to just be me and just experience the world through my own eyes. And so I enjoy it. I enjoy that feeling a lot whenever it comes along.
So similarly, how about angst or depression? Is that
I have not experienced depression. I'm not often super sad, but can I be angsty? I guess I'm the angsty twin compared to Chris, but that's only relatively speaking. I can be very angsty though. I'm trying to not be as self-righteously angsty. When I am angsty or mad, it's when I'm feeling super self-righteous. So I'm just trying to be like sometimes, especially because it's like, and of course I say this because it's self-righteous, but like sometimes it's good to be angry and self-righteous, says the self-righteous angry part of my brain, but I'm trying to be more mindful about that.
So kind of going back to what we were somewhat discussing earlier, social media, good or bad?
How could I say bad? I've made so many friends through it. It's good for me. It's good for your grandma. everyone's grandma, but yeah, it's a good thing. I hate it when people like blanketly diss social media. Everyone's staring into their phones, but like they're staring into their phones into someone else. It's just hard for people to identify that sometimes. Of course, with any cultural movement, you have to progress carefully and progress responsibly. I mean, that's how like YouTube got corrupted, right? We weren't careful. We didn't watch for the signs of corruption, and we didn't care at the time. So, be watchful of corruption and badness, but enjoy it for what it is.
So, wrapping up here then, we've talked about, romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships with ourselves. Is there anything else you want to talk about relationships that I haven't asked?
Something you haven't asked but have been kind of talking about is the validity of different kinds of relationships and the importance of diversifying those relationships in your life. There are when people talk about love, often they talk about like romantic love, but there's so many different kinds. There's platonic love, familial love, other kinds that I can't remember. There's romantic love, and in a lot of ways, we need a lot of these different kinds of love, and for different people, we need it in different combinations. So really, like, watch your own brain and feel your own heart and know what feels good to you, and try to create a world in which you can make a lot of those different kinds of love happen on a regular basis so that you can feel full and happy continuously. And if your heart is saying you need that like religious love, like the that Jesus love TM, then you should follow that instinct, Kyle. I'm just kidding. And if you don't, then don't.
Myself and everyone named Kyle listening to this is like perked up a little bit.
This is a sign.
All right, thank Nick. Thank you.
You're welcome, Kyle. Thank you for talking to me.
Hi, everyone. Yes, this is Kyle breaking into the conversation again. As always, Assumptions is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you haven't gone to the Alberta Podcast Network's website, there are so many great shows to listen to. The one I want to actually recommend this week is a very new member to the Alberta Podcast Network. It's called Re-Podcasting. This is where you're going to join hosts Janet and Lucia as they recast your favorite and not so favorite movies. This is so fun. The concept is that they take movies and say, this is how this movie could have been better had we cast somebody else in the role. Some of them you'll agree with, some of them you will very, very much disagree with, but you'll always have a great time. That's Re-Podcasting, and you can check out all the great shows by going to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Secondly, we're helped out by the ATB. I want to talk to you today about the Entrepreneur Center. Are you starting or building a business? ATB's Entrepreneur Center is a great place to go. Of course, they can help you with your banking, but they also offer workshops and networking opportunities. They can also help you get set up with a mentor. If you want to learn more information about that, your creative juices are flowing this summer, you can go to atb.com/listen. Lastly, if you have a smartphone, you should download the free CKUA app. That's a radio station here in Alberta, but all of the shows that are on the Alberta Podcast Network can be listened to through that app, Assumptions included. Whether you use Android or iOS, you can easily listen to all of the shows on the CKUA app. Thanks everyone for listening. As I mentioned at the very beginning, these are going to be some interview episodes over the next few installments, but Daniel and I will be back here eventually. Let's just say eventually. But for now, let's now get to my interview with Tyler May.
My name is Tyler May. I run a mental health podcast called The Mr. Feels, where we just talk about anything and everything mental health related to help people get better educated on the subject matter, to be able to empathize more with people that struggle with mental health problems, and to just make some people feel a little bit less alone with the problems that they're facing.
So Tyler, you might remember this, but there was a Skype call that we had here a few months ago where I feel like it was like you came out as Christian to me.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember this or not.
Vaguely.
Why do you think it was important to talk about your faith?
Because faith is essentially my most important belief. It's what makes you up as a person, whether you have faith in God, faith in humanity, yourself. Everybody has at least faith in something. It's just so essentially everybody kind of has their own personal religion, whether they want to use those words or not. I don't necessarily like the word religion either, but God is definitely a big important factor in my life, the biggest important factor, and so I almost felt hypocritical not having that be more of a forefront in my life, especially to friends who are closer to me, like yourself.
Why don't you like the word religion?
I don't like the word religion just because it puts a bad taste in other people's mouth. Because, like, from a technical aspect, you could view me as a very religious person. I believe in God. I go to church. I identify as a Christian. I do, not only that, like, I study theology. I've been to Christian universities. I read books and listen to podcasts. Like, I'm probably as religious as they come from a technical aspect, but I like to think of Christianity and my beliefs as more as, like, a relationship. Because that's exactly what it is, rather than just a practice.
How do you define your personal relationship with God?
Ooh, how do I divide my first?
What does that look like on a day-to-day level?
Oh, okay. On a day-to-day level, my relationship with God is just, hopefully, I'm not saying this happens every day, but most days, beginning every day with thankfulness, because that's been something I've been more convicted about recently, and also within the past few years. My favorite musician, songwriter, and also the being who was a component in helping me bring me out of a very depressive state that was suicidal is a man called Jon Foreman. He does these things called after shows, after concerts, where he'll do some original music and just take song suggestions and sing some songs, but every now and then it's peppered in with some Q&As, and he talked about, he just gave some life advice that says one of the most important things is just thankfulness. Because if you think about it, every celebration begins with thankfulness. So if every good thing essentially that we do or like plan or set up and put up on a pedestal, like it all has a foundation that begins with thankfulness. So when we don't start from that starting point, we're more led in a direction where nobody wants to go into. That was a complete side tangent. So do you want to re-ask the question?
So stemming from that philosophy, from that singer, is there, how do you interact with God on a day-to-day level?
Okay. I like to begin, I do like to begin every day with thankfulness and just thinking about things from above, to use biblical language that's talked about in Colossians 3, and just kind of thinking of that, like, I am alive today. Look, like this morning I woke up in Seattle, surrounded by friends in a room that was very tight together with human beings and luggage and stuff. In Seattle, a city that I've never been into, going to a conference about podcasts, that I was able to start my own podcast about mental health. Within the same year as having a severe depressive episode where I got close to committing suicide. And so looking at the dichotomy between my past and my present just made me tear up a little bit, and that's happened multiple times every day for the past couple of weeks, and it's a good thing. We need to always be reverberating back our creator with thankfulness, or if you don't believe in a creator, your existence.
How does Christianity impact the way you view the world?
In every single way. I begin from a Christian worldview where I believe in a God, which is very different than somebody who doesn't believe in a God. Let me know if I'm becoming like overbearing at all. I don't want to get like too into proselytization on accident, but can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's like, because you're a Christian, I'm just curious on how that impacts your relationship with the world.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like, how do you make your life choices?
How do I make
Christianity?
Oh, so essentially, the essence of Christianity and what a Christian looks like and their life goal is what Paul talks about as just like to glorify God in all that you do. So the idea of reverberating thankfulness is also biblical in the essence of that we need to not just like in everything give thanks that scripture talks about, but like in all that you do, whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever you do, the most often passage taken out of context by Christians and non-Christians alike, that like no matter what you're doing, like you should be aiming to glorify God in all that you do. So that isn't like a sense of obligation, which is what most people see religion in quotes as, but it's a lifestyle and a desire that you want to do. So I want to glorify God in all that I do, not that I do it all the time, but the way that that pans out is trying to think a lot less about myself and about what I want, and a lot more about what God wants, which is usually helping other people and interacting with them on a way that gets me to think deeper about them, but also them to think deeper about themselves and their circumstances and life in general.
So if we contrast that then with non-believers, how do you assume they interact with the world? Like, how do you assume their interactions are different?
An unbeliever's interactions would be different from a believer's in just the way that they kind of come at the world. If I can be blunt, and I think you'd probably say that like you have less of a foundation than I do, because everything I do is kind of founded on the belief of God and surrounded by like ancient text that's like I perceive as incredibly valid and full of truth, whereas a lot of other people might not. And so as I have a foundation to kind of stand on and live my life by, unbelievers don't have that same type of foundation. Not that they don't have a foundation at all. Of course everybody does, and hopefully has a set of morals or values that they try to live by as best they can. But I have a standard that I'm trying to live up to and live out, unlike somebody who does not believe in God and the God of the Bible.
And not getting too far into like salvation and that questions, but I guess my underlying question here is, do you believe that non-believers can be good people?
Define good people would be my what is good? And that's like a huge question that we even like ask ourselves in creating of media of any sorts, whether it's media and it's some Marvel movie where there's a good guy and there's a bad guy. Well, is that bad guy really a bad guy? And how is that good guy, what's that good guy's intentions? Like, is his intentions to like save the world, or just because he should do this thing? Like, what is good and evil? That's a bigger question at hand. So the way that people phrase that question and ask that question in the sense that they're asking, yeah, of course unbelievers can be bad people, but the way that I kind of see the world more at large, that like unlike a common belief that like we are born as a blank slate, tabula rasa, we are completely like good and normal, and our environment after being born is what makes us bad people and evil in a sense. Like that's where bad influences come into, is the world and our surroundings and not us. I believe that we're born into a world that is broken. Which might sound a little to some people, but essentially, if I'm going off of the Bible, it says no man is good, not even one, to paraphrase Romans. So no, I don't think non-believers are good in that sense, but I also don't think believers are good in that sense. It sounds nihilistic in a way that like, hey, no one's good, but that's just to highlight that God is good and there is a problem in the world, as I feel like every human being can see that there's problems in the world, and it is a broken place to an extent, whether you believe it to be as broken as I do or not, which is why there was the need for God to send a savior.
We're gonna go into some racy questions.
Ooh, I love racism. It's my favorite.
So
please use that out of context as much as you want.
That's how they usually start, actually.
Yeah, I'm gonna copy that and I'll add it to my podcast, and I'm gonna get a lot of clout for that.
So we're gonna go into like some sexuality and sexual questions here,
all right.
which is like, you know that I'm bisexual.
Yeah.
And that's a sin. So why continue being my friend?
I love you, man. And I feel like that's. I feel like I could pretty much leave it at that. Like, what? It's a sin for me, like, in some people's eyes, to not be in church today. It's a Sunday. It's a sin for me to like think wrongly about like the opposite gender or the same gender, or it's a sin for me to like, I've been making fun of cosplayers more than I should be, and that's essentially a sin. And that's not wrong, just that's as much wrong to the Bible and to Christianity beliefs as something like bisexuality, and like, yeah, I'll just leave it at that, and you can dive deeper if you want.
This is a very broad question, but we're gonna think of the church as all Christianity.
I want to add something to that
sure.
last statement, just in case. So after like the I love you ideal, that like the Bible is clearly more about loving one another, as Jesus sums the entire commandment system of old Jewish religion into 2 commandments of love your God and love your neighbor as thyself. And so that is the clear, consistent message throughout the Bible, whereas there's not a clear, consistent message that like all gay people are bad and we need to like get rid of them, which some people seem to think, both believers and non-believers.
That's kind of the segue here, because when I say the church, I know that's a very broad definition. Of course. But what do you think of the church's response to like the LGBT movement?
Oh, horrible. It's the church wrongly views the LGBT movement as an attack on the church, which it's not. It's them trying to find freedom and acceptance for themselves in society, which is maybe a challenge to Christian beliefs. But as a Christian, you shouldn't be fighting against an LGBT movement. You should be fighting to love all types of people. Not saying just fight it with love, man. Like all you need to do is love. But like the fight that we need to be having is not with the fact that somebody is gay or their sexuality at all. That's not necessary. Like the fight that we need to be having is dealing with our own beauty and brokenness, and how we, according to scripture, that we need like a solution to that, which came through Jesus.
I'm not going to take this in a political direction, but it reminds me that oftentimes people vote for the party that can more clearly express this is what we stand for instead of what we stand against.
Yeah, Republicans are really good at standing against things.
What was it? So what do you believe the purpose of sex is, and why does it exist?
The purpose of sex is fourfold. 1, procreation, solid. 2nd, pleasure. 3rd, to glorify God. In a sense, it's a natural, God-given ability. And finally, to be an act of love to one's spouse, because from the Christian worldview, marriage or sex is inside of marriage.
We were kind of talking about this morning, but talking about living in different cities and traveling so much.
Oh, yeah.
As you have.
Yeah.
What do you consider home?
I'm actually developing a video on this right now because essentially I don't really have a home. And the place that was my home, or the place that most people kind of feel as home, which would be the place where their parents kind of are, or where they grew up in, doesn't feel a whole lot like home to me. It doesn't feel a whole lot like home to me. So for those that don't know, these 2 months, all I've been doing is traveling. Right now I'm in Seattle. Last week I was in San Francisco. The week before I was in Atlanta. And before that I went through Nashville and Louisville, coming from Indianapolis. And next I'm going back to Atlanta, up again through Nashville, maybe Memphis. Then we'll hit up Louisville again and go to Indianapolis, right before going to Wisconsin for a family shoot, and then an engagement shoot in Colorado Rapids. So I'm traveling a lot of places. So essentially, home for me is quite fluid. So essentially, I don't have a home, I have pockets of home. I have a little pocket of home at my new university in Louisville. I have a little pocket of home with my internet friends at these conventions that we seem to bounce all over, with friends like Kyle. I have a pocket of home where I used to go to school, and with some friends and also a church family in Wisconsin. I have one in Indianapolis and Noblesville near Indianapolis. I have one in San Francisco where I work and where I have a lot of friends there. And I have little other pockets here and there. But home is not a place. Home is essentially more the people that you surround yourself by and that give you that sense of family. But also from a Christian worldview, this place is not your home. So I don't think that people should be searching and seeking identity and that sense of belonging and home type of in this world, and of like a sense of place, because ultimately as a Christian, home is going to be heaven.
How important is your family in your life?
Super important. Everybody says that like family is the most important thing. I disagree. Because if you look, even I believe it's in Mark, especially like when Jesus was in the temples, the rabbis and some people, I don't think it says specifically who said this, but it's like Jesus, like your family's like looking for you, and he's essentially just says that like, I am teaching like my family, like this is more important right now than like my own family, who are even like worried about where I'm at. So he's just emphasizing that these spiritual life on life relationships are even more important than family relationships at time, because family relationships doesn't have to be blood relationships. So blood isn't necessarily thicker than water. Of course, I'm going to do a lot more for my family than I am for most people. That's natural. That's what comes natural to me. But I'm not like a super family centric, like family above everything, because I don't think that that's the absolute best prioritization.
How is your... Do you use your parents' marriage as any type of template?
I'm not married, so I use no marriage as any type of template.
Let's segue into like friendships specifically.
I hate them. Kidding. Yeah, especially this one.
Who do you consider your best friend to be?
Cop out answer, Jesus, holla. I don't know. I don't have a best friend. I don't think that that's a bad idea, but I wouldn't say I have a best friend.
Do you find friendships hard to find and cultivate currently?
Used to be my absolute biggest struggle. Currently, I've found that friendships are a lot easier to come by and cultivate if you're not obsessed with making them happen like you think they should be. Friendships happen better in a natural state when you're less thinking about yourself and getting friendships for you, and more thinking about other people and like, how can I help this person feel more comfortable or more welcome or have better surroundings? that's where I've found it's super easy to cultivate friendships when you're not obsessing over, oh, I have no friends. Like, I've been there my whole life pretty much, it seems. I got real close to doing some bad things because that was my thought process for a very long time. And friendships are a lot easier to come by as like, how can I be that person's friend? Not for me, but because I think that person needs a friend or wants a friend.
How do you think society currently views singledom?
Singledom is viewed both as a great thing that's full of freedom and also something that's somewhat looked down upon as being lesser just because you don't have a significant other that you're dedicated to.
Do you think it's viewed differently in the church as it is in
of
secular
course.
society?
Oh man, people in the church look at singledom way worse than people outside the church. And I don't think they read their Bibles about it that much. And I don't think they understand that, like, Paul, the dude who wrote, like, most of the New Testament, said that it's, like, actually better for you to be single. Like, he literally said that, and it's really hard to, like, say that singleness is a bad thing when, like, your most popular apostle was single. And a lot of them were. But he also said that, like, it's better to marry than it is to burn with passion, and that it's a great thing. Marriage is a God-given thing, and it's also a representation of Christ in the church. Both are good. One is not better than the other. You're a lot more free to do things and to serve God, and to do, if you're not a believer, to do whatever the heck you want if you're single than you are if you're committed in a loving marriage relationship.
How do you find dating in the modern world?
Oh, this is asking the guy who just started a Tinder to market his freelance business. Am I really the best person to ask this question to? No, I don't know. I don't date. I haven't been on a date in like a year and a half, probably. Maybe not the best person to have any insights on this topic.
That's all right. This is a very leading question that I'm about to ask you.
Oh boy, here we go.
How do you overcome the oppression of the modern digital age?
I don't. I give into it, and I'm trying to make it my own. And I see the digital age and force of all of the millennials and dank memehood, and I'm trying to overtake it and make it mine. I'm the overlord.
Do you ever suffer from loneliness?
Do I ever suffer from loneliness? A lot of days. Yeah, sure.
How do you overcome that?
I want to get this right. I overcome it by realizing that any sense of loneliness is selfishness if you look at it correctly. There's a lot of ways you can look at it and be like, well, people are like alone a lot of times, and that's a valid feeling to feel. Sure, it's valid to like have a feeling of like being alone, but you need to seek to find contentment in that feeling or do something about it. Loneliness in of itself is essentially selfishness for you being sad about something that you don't currently have. That's real negative sounding view, but that's where I land.
Lastly, we've talked about relationships in multiple different ways.
Sure.
For relationships, friendships, yourself, God. Is there anything else that you want to say about relationships?
They're hard. They're real hard, man. They are very hard. I've made a lot of amazing relationships this year, and I've also lost a lot of my closest relationships this year. They're very fluid, even when you think that they shouldn't be. And ideally, relationships should be long-lasting and even life-lasting. But that's not always the case, and nor should it be the case in some situations. So it's difficult. Realize that it's difficult, but also realize it's absolutely necessary. Relationships can essentially, you can essentially define the meaning of life in relationships. So if you don't have them and you're not cultivating them, ask yourself, what are you doing with your life? Dab.
Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melville Jones. This episode edited by Kyle Marshall. Our thumbnail was created by the always great Chris Taniguchi. Most of the music in this episode was from the band The Parson Redheads, which you can check out all of their music anywhere digital music is sold. There was also some light riffing that Nick Taniguchi was doing, and by people that I'm not cool enough to know. If you want a full rundown of the articles and media that may have been referenced in this episode, check out the show notes that Daniel puts together that are attached to this episode. It's always a great document he puts together. Thanks for listening to The Credits. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.